My name is Delilah Rowan Hart. I'm 34, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the one who gets the job done, first to volunteer, last to complain, the sibling who remembers birthdays and bakes the cake. I planned my sister's baby shower between trial prep and redecorated my parents' guest room during a layover. I thought that meant I belonged. I was wrong. I found out I'd been uninvited from my cousin Mallory's wedding via a polite group email titled Weekend Logistics. The subject line was harmless. Inside, buried between carpool arrangements and Airbnb codes, was one offhand line. As discussed, we're asking Delilah to step back from attending for the sake of harmony. No call, no private message, no confrontation. Just a bullet point. I stared at the screen for a long time, blinking like it would rearrange itself into something I could understand. I read the sentence again. For the sake of harmony. The words rang hollow. Ridiculous. Like I was a clash of cymbals in a choir. Like my presence was a risk. Not a gift, not a given. I was the one who booked Mallory's original venue when she was too overwhelmed. I'd created her wedding budget spreadsheet, color-coded, customized tabs, and I was the one who gently told her those peony arrangements she wanted in August would cost half her catering budget. I'd offered to pay for half of it, actually, when she cried about the florist. I was in the original bridal party. But then my cousin Jen came back from Bali, suddenly ready to be involved again. And somehow, just like that, I was not. I didn't cry. Not yet. My fingers hovered over my laptop keys while my body stayed perfectly still, like grief might not find me if I didn't move. Then I saw the time. 6:42 p.m. Dinner with Mom was at 7 o'clock. I didn't cancel. Because of course I didn't. I drove the 15 minutes to her house in silence, my phone face down beside me. The sunset painted everything in gold, like the universe was mocking me. I was early. I'm always early. She opened the door wearing her apron, half her hair clipped up, the rest falling in soft, planned waves. She smiled like nothing had happened, like I wasn't the leper of the family email thread. "Darling, you're here? Help me toss the salad?" I stood there for a breath too long. Then I stepped in. The air smelled like rosemary and baked salmon. The table was set for 3. Me, her, and my sister Morgan, who was always late but always forgiven. I walked to the kitchen counter, picked up the wooden spoon. I tossed the salad, and when Morgan arrived 20 minutes later, kissed Mom on the cheek and said, "Have you guys seen the wedding itinerary?" Without a hint of irony, I finally asked, "So I'm not going then?" The air dropped. Morgan froze, one hand still midair, a cherry tomato pinched between her fingers. Mom blinked. "Darling." "I got the email," I said calmly, though my voice had begun to tremble. "I just want to hear it from someone I know." Morgan looked suddenly very interested in her napkin. "Mallory thought it might be better if you weren't there." "Why?" "She's nervous. About tension. About you and Jen. About—" "She told you to tell me?" "No," Morgan said, finally meeting my eyes. "She didn't think she had to. She assumed you'd take the hint." And there it was. The shift. The betrayal wasn't just being excluded. It was discovering that no one thought I'd protest, that I was so reasonable, so accommodating, so obsessively composed, that I could be erased politely, and I'd make it easy for them. I put the spoon down and sat slowly into the chair at the head of the table. My chair. I always sat there. I don't even know who assigned it to me. I just took it. Once, and it stuck. "I helped plan that wedding," I said. "I know," Mom whispered. "I paid for her venue deposit when her card bounced." "I know. And you said nothing." Mom wiped her hands on her apron and sat across from me. Her eyes were glossy, but not with guilt, more like regret, the polite kind, the safe kind, the kind that comes from disappointing a stranger. She said you make things feel heavy, Mom said. Like everything has to be perfect or else it doesn't count. I stared at her. I'm the reason things work. I'm the reason holidays aren't chaos. I'm the one who organizes the family reunion every other year. You are, she agreed. But maybe people are tired of feeling managed. Managed? It's not a bad thing, she said too quickly. You're just always on, and sometimes people want messy. They want ease. I felt something inside me collapse. Not in a dramatic, cinematic way, just quietly. A floorboard giving out beneath decades of good behavior. I'm not going to beg, I said, but I won't pretend this doesn't hurt. Morgan looked at me then. Delilah, it's not personal. I laughed. Of course it is. I was cut from a guest list. That's always personal. Mom stood and reached for my plate. I let her take it. Let her scrape the salad into the sink like nothing had been said. I left before dessert. Back in my car, I stared at the invitation still magnetized to my dashboard. A custom watercolor of Mallory and Jason beneath an oak tree. A symbol of their lasting roots. I felt bile rise in my throat. I started the car. And I didn't cry. Not yet. But as I pulled out of the driveway, my phone buzzed. A text. From Jason. Hey, weird question. Did you write me letters in college? I stared at it. My fingers shook. And then I remembered. I had. Years ago. Unsent. Unfinished. He wasn't supposed to find them. And suddenly, everything that had just happened might not be about me being too much after all. It might be about a truth someone was desperate to bury. Jason's text sat on my screen like a fuse, and my whole body felt wired with the tension of a bomb about to go off. I parked in front of my apartment and just stared, my keys still in the ignition, the engine ticking as it cooled. His message wasn't accusatory. It wasn't angry or confused, just curious, polite. But it cracked open a memory I'd carefully buried. College, sophomore year. Mallory and I had shared an apartment for a semester while she did an internship in the city. Jason was her long-distance boyfriend back then, sweet, ambitious, studying mechanical engineering, and the only person who had ever noticed I existed at those family barbecues. I had loved him the way quiet people love, fiercely, inwardly, like a secret I could keep safe just by never naming it. The letters weren't love letters, not exactly. They were more like confessions. I wrote them late at night, curled on the couch while Mallory was asleep, pouring out the thoughts I could never say, about family, about pressure, about how tired I was of being perfect. Jason had this way of listening, even in the few conversations we'd had, that made me feel like I wasn't performing. I never gave them to him. I never meant to. But if he had them now... My phone buzzed again. Jason. I found them in a storage box with some old notebooks Mallory said were mine. They're not. They're signed D. D. That was how I signed them. Just the initial, just enough to be honest without being exposed. I got out of the car slowly, locking it with a mechanical beep, and climbed the stairs to my apartment. Inside, everything was clean. Controlled. My world curated. Not a sock out of place. I dropped my keys into the ceramic dish on the entry table, kicked off my shoes, and sat on the edge of my couch, the phone still in my hand. I could ignore him, pretend it was nothing, say they were drafts for a writing class. But I'd signed them, and he had reached out. I replied. Me. Yes, I wrote them. I never meant for you to see them. It took him a few minutes to answer, and in that time I stood, paced, pulled my hair up and down 3 different times. I hated this feeling. Vulnerability, uncontrolled exposure, like someone had printed my private thoughts and passed them around at Thanksgiving. Then, Jason. They're beautiful. I've read them twice. I didn't know you felt all that. About your family. About everything. Not about me. Not about him. That should have been a relief. But my heart was racing. Me. I was young. I was sorting through a lot. Please don't tell Mallory. There was a longer pause this time. I could practically feel him weighing something on the other end. Jason. She's already seen them. I sat down hard. The air left my lungs. That was it then. That was the real reason I'd been cut. Not because I was too intense or too controlling. Not because I'd color-coded a guest list or tried too hard with the caterer. It was the letters. Jason must have found them, read them, and Mallory, what? Felt threatened? Betrayed? Like I'd been scheming for her fiancé this entire time? The injustice of it rose in me like fire. Because those letters weren't about Jason. Not really. He was the recipient, yes. But the content was mine. The hurt, the pressure, the loneliness of being the good one. The one expected to sacrifice, to keep it all together. She didn't even care what I'd said. Just that he'd read it. My phone buzzed again. Jason. She got upset, but not in the way you think. She said she always suspected you liked me, that it was why you never got close to her again after college. I hadn't realized I hadn't. But he was right. After graduation, we'd drifted. I told myself it was life, jobs, cities, time. But deep down, I'd felt it too. A wedge. Something unspoken that made our relationship feel performative, fragile. Jason kept texting. Jason, she thinks you were trying to take something from her. And there it was. Not just the exclusion, but the accusation beneath it. My breath caught. I opened the voice memo app, needing to say something, even if it wasn't to her, even if it was just to the void. Mallory, I said, my voice low, almost shaking. Those letters weren't about you or him. They were mine. The first time in my life I said the truth without editing it for someone else's comfort. I wrote because no one ever asked me how I felt. Not really. You got the parties, the spotlight. I got the responsibility. I never asked for anything, not even understanding. I paused. I didn't want Jason. I wanted to matter. To someone. Anyone. And maybe he was just the first person who looked at me and didn't see a to-do list on legs. I deleted the memo without saving it. Too dangerous, but the release of it stayed. I stared at my reflection in the dark window across the room. I didn't look like a villain or a victim. I looked like someone who had been quiet too long. Another message buzzed in. Jason. Can I ask you something? Why didn't you ever send them? I thought about that, then typed, me. Because I knew how it would end, and I wasn't wrong. He didn't reply after that. I sat in the dark for a long time, and for the first time since that damn email, I let myself cry. Not a tidy, manageable cry, but the kind that comes when the dam finally breaks. Because being excluded from the wedding wasn't the wound. It was the confirmation of what I'd always suspected. They never really wanted me there to begin with, not as I was, only as the version of me that kept everything clean and unspoken. But that girl, she was gone. I woke up the next morning with a headache that throbbed behind my eyes like a second heartbeat. I hadn't slept well. I'd tossed and turned all night, haunted by images I couldn't quite stop from replaying. Jason's name glowing on my screen. Mallory's smirk that last Christmas when she said, "You always did think you knew best," and the line in that email, "for the sake of harmony." Harmony. What a delicate word to weaponize, as if I was noise, static, something to mute so the music could play uninterrupted. I dragged myself out of bed, pulled on leggings and a hoodie, and made coffee I didn't even want. I sat at the kitchen island, watching the steam rise like a question mark. My phone buzzed against the countertop. For one irrational moment, I hoped it was Jason again. It wasn't. It was my father. A rare occurrence. Dad. "Morning, kiddo. Any chance I could drop by later? Just want to check in." That was code. My dad didn't check in. He wasn't the kind of man who dropped by unannounced unless something was wrong, or unless someone had asked him to. I stared at the message for a moment, then typed, "Me. Sure, noon. Dad. Perfect, bringing bagels." I told myself I wasn't going to spiral, that this was just a friendly visit. But when he showed up at 12:05 with a bag of poppy seed and an expression I hadn't seen since the day he told me Mom had been an offender bender, I knew someone had sent him. He sat down, opened the bag, pushed one toward me, and said nothing for a while. My dad's way of softening the blow was always food, pastries after parent-teacher meetings, pizza on bad report card days. It was his way of saying, "I love you," even when things are hard. "Mallory called me," he said finally. There it was. I didn't move. I buttered the bagel slowly, methodically, pretending my hands weren't shaking. "She's upset," he said. "Says she feels exposed, embarrassed, hurt." "Hurt?" I said, barely recognizing my voice. "She's hurt?" "She said you wrote things about Jason, about the family, things she didn't know, things that made her feel like she didn't know you at all." I laughed, just once, bitter and involuntary. "She didn't know me. She never tried to." Dad winced. "Delilah, no, she's marrying a man I used to have feelings for, years ago. Feelings I never acted on, feelings I wrote down and never shared. She found them by accident, and now I'm being punished for being honest in private." "You wrote to him." "I wrote about him," I corrected. He just happened to be the name I addressed it to because, at the time, he was the only one who ever seemed to listen. Dad looked at me, and for once, his expression cracked. He wasn't just being diplomatic. He looked like he was actually sad. "Why didn't you tell us you felt that alone?" he asked. I blinked. "I didn't think I was allowed to." He sat back, rubbed his hands over his face. "You were always the one we didn't worry about. You just handled things. School, jobs, life. You made it look easy. It wasn't." "I know that now," he said quietly. We sat in silence for a minute, the weight of years pressing down between us. "She wants to talk to you," he said. "Mallory." "Oh, now she does? She says she didn't mean to exile you, that she reacted emotionally, that she was hurt." I stared at the ceiling for a long moment. "You know what's funny? She didn't reach out to me. She called you. She couldn't even handle the conflict without outsourcing it." Dad sighed. "We're all bad at confrontation. You know that." "No, I'm good at it. That's why you all avoid me." He didn't deny it. I stood, walked to the sink, and stared out the window. Across the street, a young girl was jumping rope on the sidewalk, her hair a halo of movement. She wasn't trying to perform. She was just playing, just existing. I envied her. "Tell her I'll meet her," I said finally. "But it's on my terms, neutral ground, and she doesn't get to pretend this is about the letters. It's about years of her making me feel like an accessory in my own family." Dad nodded. "Okay." He left soon after. I didn't finish the bagel. We met 2 days later at a cafe downtown. I picked the place. Not one we'd grown up going to. Not the one where she and Jason had their first date. A neutral space. Clean. Unattached. Mallory showed up in a cream turtleneck and too much perfume, looking like she hadn't lost a single night of sleep over this. Her smile was brittle. "Hey," she said, like we were about to make polite conversation over tea. I didn't smile back. I sat. She folded her hands on the table. "You look good." "Let's skip that," I said. She nodded. "Okay." There was a pause. Then, "I didn't mean to hurt you." "You didn't just hurt me," I said. "You erased me." "It wasn't about punishment." "You called it for harmony, like I was the discord." "You wrote about my fiancé," she said, her voice cracking slightly. 5 years ago, before you were engaged, before you were even serious, and I never acted on it." "You wrote things, personal things." "I had feelings, Mallory, human feelings, that I didn't share, that I wrote privately. You found them. You chose to be wounded." She blinked. "You think I chose this?" I think you used it to justify what you already felt, I said. That I was too much, too intense, too present, that my usefulness was tolerable until it wasn't. She didn't deny it. Instead, she looked down. You always made me feel like I was failing at being an adult. You had it all together, your job, your apartment, the way Mom talks about you like you're some kind of executive angel. I always felt like I had to compete. I stared at her. I didn't want you to compete. I wanted you to see me, not the planner, not the doer, me. She looked up. Her eyes were wet now. You scare me sometimes, she whispered, because you're so sure, and I never am. I didn't know what to do with that, not right away, so I just said, You should have told me that, before deciding I didn't belong. I panicked. You always do, and I always forgive it, but not this time. She looked at me. So what now? I sipped my coffee, thought about it. I don't want your apology, I said. I want your honesty. Next time, say what you mean. If you're jealous, say it. If you're scared, say that too. But don't exile me and call it harmony. She nodded slowly. I'm sorry, she said again. And this time it sounded real. We sat in silence after that, but it didn't feel sharp anymore. It felt like something new, something earned. And maybe, for the first time in years, we were finally saying the things we didn't write down. 2 days after that coffee meeting, I was still spinning. Not with rage anymore, but with something stranger, something messier. A blend of exhaustion, relief, and a tentative ache that felt like the beginning of thaw. Mallory and I hadn't hugged. We hadn't made amends in any sweeping way. But the truth was spoken. Some of it, at least. And truth, even in fragments, felt more sacred than silence. I didn't tell anyone else we'd met. Not Morgan, not Dad, not Jason. I didn't need an audience. I needed space. And for the first time, I gave myself permission to take it. That weekend, I drove to the lake. I hadn't been there in years. It was a place we used to go as kids, all of us, Mom, Dad, the cousins. Summers in rented cabins that smelled like sunscreen and mosquito coils. I always brought books. Morgan brought drama. Mallory brought boys. It had been one of the last places I remembered feeling safe, before life started assigning us roles, before family became something you earned by editing yourself. The cabin I rented was small, 2 bedrooms, creaky floors, a fireplace that didn't quite work. It was perfect. I spent the first day doing nothing. Literally nothing. I didn't check my phone. I didn't answer emails. I sat on the porch with tea and let the silence wrap around me like a coat that finally fit. But on the second day, the quiet got louder, as it always does. I found myself pulling out the letters. Yes, those letters. The ones Jason had found. The ones Mallory had read. I'd thought I'd destroyed them years ago. I hadn't. There was a backup. I found them in an old Google Drive folder titled Mia C. Writings. A convenient lie to myself. I opened one. It was dated November 18th, 2013. Dear Jay, it began. Sometimes I feel like I'm the spare tire in my own life, like I'm only pulled out when someone else breaks down. I swallowed hard. That girl, that version of me. She was trying so damn hard not to need anything, not to be a burden. She disguised her longing in metaphors and restraint. She asked questions no one answered. I read 5 more. In one, I wrote about Christmas, the year Mom forgot to hang my stocking. In another, I described a dream I'd had where I disappeared from the dinner table and no one noticed. The imagery was clumsy. The emotion wasn't. And then, in the 7th letter, I found something that made my heart stop. You're the only person who's ever asked me what I actually want, instead of what I can do. I don't know what to do with that, but I think about it a lot. I think about you a lot. I closed the laptop. My face burned, not with shame, but with the acute pain of being seen, even by my past self. He had asked me that. One night on the porch of our college apartment, I'd been stressing about final exams, about Morgan's latest crisis, about my parents' quiet war over the roof repairs. Jason had handed me a beer, leaned back in his chair, and said, "What would you do if none of them needed you?" I didn't answer. I think I changed the subject. I hadn't thought about that night in years. But I remembered how it felt, like someone was holding space for me instead of squeezing me into one. That night, I walked down to the edge of the lake. The sky was littered with stars, the kind you only get when you leave behind the world's noise. I didn't bring the letters. I brought my phone. I stared at Jason's contact for a long time, and I called him. He answered on the third ring. "Delilah?" His voice was cautious, kind. "Hey," I said. "Sorry, is this a bad time?" "No, just surprised." "I'm at the lake," I said by way of explanation. "The one we used to go to." A pause. "That place was magic." "Still is," I said. "Listen, I read them, the letters." Another pause. "Yeah?" I needed to hear what I sounded like back then. I needed to remember how far I've come, how much I'd buried. He let that sit. Then quietly, "You were never a burden." "I know," I said. "Now I do." He exhaled, like he'd been holding his breath since I called. "Mallory and I had a fight," he said suddenly. "After that day, after she read them, she said she felt like I was choosing you." I went cold. "Were you?" "No," he said. "I was choosing honesty. I told her the letters didn't change anything about how I felt about her, but they did make me realize how little any of us really understood you." I didn't speak. "I wanted to tell you," he continued, "that I'm sorry, not for finding them, but for never checking in, for fading out when you moved away. I guess I assumed you were good. You always seemed untouchable." "That's the trick," I said. "Being perfect is the best way to keep people from seeing you." He didn't argue. After a beat, he said, "You know, I kept one." "One what?" "One of the letters, the last one. You said something in it that stuck." "What?" "I think we all confuse being needed with being loved." I closed my eyes. "I still do," I whispered. "Me too," he said. We didn't talk much after that, just sat in silence, phones pressed to our ears, listening to the lake and the wind and everything that had never been said. Before we hung up, he asked, "Are you coming to the wedding?" "I don't know," I said. "Should I?" He hesitated. "I think that's up to you." When the call ended, I stared out over the lake and felt something shift. I wasn't angry anymore. Not really. Just tired of being the version of myself they found convenient, the fixer, the planner, the glue. I wasn't glue. I was a person. A complicated, whole, worthy person. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop waiting for an invitation to prove it. By the time I drove back from the lake, my inbox had started to fill again. Texts, emails, calendar reminders. Work pulling me into its orbit like a tide I couldn't resist. But I wasn't ready to fall back into that rhythm. Not yet. I'd just started hearing my own voice again, and I didn't want to drown it out with meetings and client calls. I parked in my spot, walked up the 3 flights to my apartment, and stood in the doorway longer than I should have. Everything was exactly as I left it. Flawless. Precise. Controlled. The throw pillows were still at perfect 45-degree angles. The counters gleamed. The mail was stacked in date order. But now it all felt sterile. Like a showroom version of my life, not a life I actually lived in. I dumped my overnight bag in the hallway and let it stay there. Then I walked barefoot into the kitchen and opened the fridge. Half a salad, a bottle of Sauvignon Blanc I never opened, pre-cut fruit, a life curated for efficiency, not joy. I left the fridge open and stared at it for a full minute. And then I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my sister. Morgan picked up on the second ring, her voice sleepy and suspicious. "You okay?" "I was just wondering," I said, "if you still do Sunday night dinners." A pause. "You mean with Dad and me?" "Yeah." Another pause. "Sometimes, when I'm not at Jordan's." Jordan was her new boyfriend. Chiropractor, bearded, soft-spoken in a way that made me uneasy, like he was always calculating how much he had to care. "Well," I said, "I was thinking of stopping by, if you're doing one." Morgan was quiet for a moment. Then, "We're grilling, at Dad's. 7? "Great," I said. "I'll bring something." I could practically hear her shock. "You don't have to." "I want to." We hung up, and I stood there with the phone pressed to my chest, unsure of what had just shifted. I hadn't gone to a casual family dinner in almost a year. Not since the last one, when Morgan rolled her eyes as I offered to help with the side dishes and Dad forgot to ask me about my job, and I left with my stomach in knots and a too-tight smile on my face. But this time felt different. Not because I expected them to change, but because I had. And maybe that was enough. At 6:40, I walked into my dad's backyard with a pie. It wasn't homemade, just something from the bakery down the street. But still, I brought something, I took up space. That was the point. Morgan was already there, barefoot in cut-off jeans, laughing too loudly at something Jordan was saying. Dad stood at the grill, flipping skewers like it was a performance. There were citronella candles on the patio table, a cooler full of drinks. It looked like something from a magazine, except no one was pretending to be perfect. When Morgan saw me, her mouth opened a little. "Delilah?" "Hey," I said, holding up the pie like proof I was allowed to exist. "I heard there was dinner." Dad smiled, wide and unguarded. "Well, look who's here, just in time for the good stuff." I set the pie on the table. Morgan stood up. For a second I thought she might hug me. Instead, she gave me a sideways glance. "You look relaxed." I laughed. "I went to the lake, needed some air." "You go up there alone?" "I did." She gave a low whistle. "Ballsy." I shrugged. "Or overdue." Dinner was surprisingly easy. No one asked about the wedding. No one mentioned Mallory or Jason or the letters or the scandal quietly rippling under everything, and I didn't bring it up. Not because I wanted to avoid it, but because I wanted to see if I could be here without being defined by what had happened. I just wanted to be their sister again, their daughter, a person, not a fixer or a threat. At one point, Jordan asked what I did for fun. I actually laughed. "I don't know." Morgan snorted into her drink. "Jesus, Delilah." "I mean it. I've been so busy trying to be something, I forgot how to want something." Dad looked up from his drink. "So what do you want now?" It was a good question. I stared at the citronella candle for a moment, its flame dancing like it knew something I didn't. "I want to figure that out," I said, "without earning it first." That silenced the table for a moment. Not in an awkward way, in a real way. Like we were finally sitting in the same room, at the same temperature, breathing the same air. After dinner, I helped Morgan with the dishes. We stood at the sink in companionable quiet, water running, plates clinking. "Hey," she said, drawing a bowl. I read the letters. I froze. She didn't look at me, just kept drawing. "I went to Mallory's last week. She left them out. Said she didn't care who read them anymore." I didn't speak. "They were raw," she said. "Not in a bad way, just honest. It made me realize I don't know you. Not really. You never asked." "I didn't think I had to. You always seemed so self-contained." I rinsed another plate. "It's not containment. It's survival." She nodded. "I get that now." I turned off the faucet, "You and Mallory," she said, "are never going to be best friends again. You know that, right?" "Yeah," I said. "But maybe we can be honest. That's enough." She passed me the last plate. "So are you going to the wedding?" I looked out the window. The backyard was empty now, just a citronella candle flickering alone on the patio table. "I don't know," I said. Morgan put her hand on my arm. "Well, if you go, sit with me. I'll save you a seat." That was the thing that undid me, not the letter, not the confrontation, not even Jason's voice on the phone. It was that small act of inclusion, of choosing me, even now, even still. Later that night, back in my apartment, I sat on my bed with my laptop and opened a blank document. At the top, I typed, "The back row." I didn't know what it would become, but it felt like the right place to start. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. Something about starting that document, "The back row," had cracked open a new door inside me. For years, I'd done everything to be palatable, manageable, efficient. But sitting at that family dinner, bringing a store-bought pie and talking about desire like it wasn't a dirty word, had made me realize just how much of myself I'd kept locked away. The words came fast at first. I wrote about the email, the phrase "for the sake of harmony," and how it echoed like an accusation. I wrote about the way silence can masquerade as love, how people will gladly take everything you offer them and then resent you for the ways you stop showing up once you're empty. I wrote about the letters, not their contents, but their existence. About the girl who had written them, quiet, restrained, desperate for a place that didn't ask her to prove her worth in spreadsheets and errands. A girl who wrote to someone who'd never expected her to fix anything, because he simply wanted to know what she felt. And I wrote about the wedding. Not because I'd made a decision yet, but because I needed to see what it would mean to go, and what it would mean not to. By the time the sun hit my living room window, I had 10 pages. 10 pages that didn't pretend. No curated version of events. No even-handed narrator smoothing the corners. Just truth. Messy, wounded, imperfect truth. I closed the document without rereading it and leaned back on the couch, my chest heaving with something I could only describe as freedom. The next day, I got a voicemail from Mallory. Her voice was tight, like she was trying to stay composed. "I heard from Morgan you've been writing about everything. If you're planning to publish anything, I'd appreciate a heads up, not because I want to stop you, just because I want to know how much of me is in it." I didn't respond immediately. I took a walk instead, through the park where I used to jog before work, past the fountain where Jason had once waited for Mallory with a bouquet of wildflowers and a note card he didn't sign. I remembered watching them from my car that day, pretending I'd just happened to be there, pretending I didn't ache. By the time I made it home, I'd made my decision. I called her. She picked up after 3 rings. "Hey." "I won't use your name," I said. There was a pause. "Okay?" "I'm writing for me. Not about you. You were just part of the fallout." Mallory exhaled, slow and shaky. "You make it sound like I was a meteor." "You were," I said. "We both were." Another pause. "Are you coming? To the wedding?" "Yeah." I leaned against the kitchen counter and let the silence grow before I answered. "I don't know," I said. "Part of me wants to show up, just to prove I can. Part of me wants to let you have the day you curated, unbothered by the ghost of your cousin's emotional honesty." She gave a breathless laugh. "You make that sound like a horror movie." It kind of was. Fair. "I don't want to be disruptive," I said, "but I also don't want to keep sitting in back rows just so other people feel comfortable." "Then don't," she said. I blinked. "What?" "Don't sit in the back. If you come, sit up front. Sit with Morgan, or sit next to Jason and me, whatever. Just don't come halfway." I didn't say anything, because I didn't know how. Because part of me had expected her to say, "Don't come at all." "You're still my cousin," she said, "even if we're not best friends. even if we're not the same kind of person." "That's generous of you," I said carefully. "No," she replied, "it's overdue." We hung up after that, not with any finality, just quietly. The wedding was a week away. Every day I debated it. I imagined the stares, the polite tension, the way Morgan would scoot over to make space, and how people might whisper as I walked past them. But I also imagined something else. Walking in with nothing to prove, with my hair curled the way I liked and a dress I didn't need anyone to approve of. I imagined sitting down with my back straight and my hands calm and looking across the aisle at Mallory, not as someone I had to forgive or convince or outperform, but just as someone who had once known me badly and maybe now was trying to know me better. The night before the wedding, Morgan called. "Still thinking about tomorrow?" "Yes." "Can I tell you something? Please." "I read the back row, the part you sent me." My heart stopped. "You read it?" "Yeah, twice." I swallowed. "And?" "I cried both times. That did it. That cracked something open I'd been bracing against." "I never knew you felt so alone," Morgan whispered. "You were always doing everything. I guess I thought you liked it that way." "I didn't," I said. "I didn't know how to stop." She paused. "So what happens now?" "I show up," I said. "Not just tomorrow, but after, in my own life." "Good," she said, "because I'm saving you a seat, second row." "Why not first?" "It's where the real people sit," she said, teasing. "Not the performers." I laughed. "Then I'll be there." After we hung up, I printed the first 3 chapters of the back row. I folded them carefully and tucked them into an envelope. Not for Mallory, not for Jason, not for an editor, for me, to hold, to remember, to witness. And then I packed my bag. Not a planner's bag, not a fixer's bag, not the emergency kit Delilah with tissues and a sewing kit and backup earrings. Just me, a dress, a pair of shoes, and a decision I wasn't going to apologize for anymore. The next day, I walked into the chapel 10 minutes before the music started. I wore green, not because it matched the color scheme, but because I wanted to. I kept my hair down. I didn't wear heels. I sat next to Morgan in the second row. She didn't scoot over. She'd saved me a space. And when Mallory walked down the aisle, her eyes caught mine. Just for a second. Not with a glare. Not with shame. But something softer. Recognition. Maybe even relief. And I smiled. Because I was no longer the outsider. Not the organizer. Not the threat. Not the back row girl. Just me. Finally. The ceremony was short, elegant, efficient, sentimental in all the right places. Mallory looked beautiful, of course. Jason, calm and reverent. They exchanged vows under an arch of eucalyptus and baby's breath while sunlight streamed through the tall stained glass windows like some quiet, divine approval. But I barely heard the words. I kept thinking about the moment she looked at me, not past me, not through me, at me. It wasn't forgiveness, not entirely. But it wasn't resentment either. It was something more fragile, more dangerous, mutual awareness, the kind that only exists between people who've hurt each other and know they're both at fault. I felt no satisfaction in being there, only gravity. After the ceremony, people filtered into the reception tent, a massive white structure nestled between old oak trees, strung with fairy lights and surrounded by the soft buzz of an early evening breeze. There was a string quartet, a signature cocktail, place cards hand-lettered in gold ink. I found mine without having to search. Delilah Hart, table 3, front and center, just to the left of the couple's family table. It wasn't the back, it wasn't exile, but it didn't feel like home either. At the table, Morgan was already seated, sipping champagne and swirling the glass like a gossip columnist with too many secrets. She nodded as I sat. "You look good," she said, "but not like you're trying. That's the dream, right?" I gave a small smile. Working on it. Mason joined us next, our older cousin, the unofficial peacekeeper in our family. He greeted me with a soft clap on the back and a careful, "It's good to see you," which in family language meant, "I heard what happened, I don't want to pick a side, but I'm glad you came anyway." I appreciated the diplomacy. Throughout the dinner, I felt the occasional glance, not hostile, just curious. The way people look at a familiar painting that suddenly has a new frame, like they were trying to figure out if I had changed, or if they just hadn't really looked before. At one point, during the salad course, Jason stood up. He tapped his glass with the back of a knife and cleared his throat. "I didn't want to do a long speech," he said, "but I do want to say something that's not in the program." Mallory looked at him sharply, her smile faltering for just a beat. "I want to thank everyone who's here tonight," Jason continued, "not just for showing up, but for showing up honestly. We've all changed a lot over the years, and weddings aren't just about two people. They're about what it means to show up for each other, even when it's not easy." He looked at Mallory, "Especially then." Then, subtly, carefully, he glanced at me. It wasn't dramatic, no long stares, just a nod, a blink of recognition. I didn't flinch. I nodded back, because that's what this was. Not an apology, not a reunion, but a soft kind of acknowledgement. "I see you." The reception unfolded in layers after that. Dancing, drinking, the usual chaos of people trying to perform joy while also feeling the awkward weight of real life pressing in at the edges. And somewhere in the middle of it all, while Dancing Queen played and two elderly aunts did the Macarena like it was a sacred rite, I found myself laughing. Not the polite kind. Not the curated chuckle of someone managing their social image. Real laughter, loud and sudden. Morgan had spilled red wine on her shoe, and the way she cursed, "Oh, for the love of Merlot," was so absurdly on brand that it cracked me wide open. And just like that, something loosened in me. Grief, maybe. Or fear. Or the pressure of needing to mean something to everyone. For the first time in years, I didn't, and it felt like relief. Later in the night, I stepped out into the garden behind the tent. The air was cooler now, the music muffled by canvas and bodies. I needed a moment, not because anything was wrong, but because I'd finally learned that I didn't need to earn every breath I took by filling it with usefulness. Jason was already out there, leaning against a tree, tie loose, hair tousled. He looked up when he saw me. "Hey," he said. "Hey." We stood in silence for a moment. "I'm glad you came," he said finally. "I wasn't sure I would. I wasn't sure you should." I smirked. "Thanks." "I mean that in the best way," he said quickly. "There was a time I would have said, stay away, keep things simple. But now, I think complexity is honest. And you were always the honest one." I leaned against the same tree, opposite side. "You knew I wrote those letters," I said quietly, "even before you found them." He looked at me. "I suspected. And you never said anything? I didn't want to ruin things. For who?" He didn't answer, but his silence was answer enough. I turned to face him, not confrontational, just open. "I'm not here to undo anything," I said. "I'm not here to claim anything. I'm not trying to be the girl from those letters anymore." "You're not," he said. "You're something else now." "What?" "Whole." The word made me still because I wasn't. Not entirely, but maybe that didn't matter. Maybe it was enough to be trying. Jason stepped forward, just slightly. "I kept one of the letters," he admitted again. "The last one. I know. It made me think a lot about what we miss when we choose convenience over connection." "Did it make you think about Mallory?" He nodded. "And you." I met his eyes. Then maybe it did what it was meant to do. We didn't hug. We didn't linger. We just stood there. Two people who could have been something once, but who had grown into themselves instead. And then I turned to go. Back inside, the party had started to wind down. Morgan was dancing barefoot, Dad was slow dancing with a woman I didn't recognize, and Mallory was at the head table, smiling tiredly as she leaned into Jason's shoulder. As I passed, she reached out, fingers brushing mine. "Thank you," she said. "For showing up? For not leaving? For staying quiet?" I didn't ask. I just nodded. Because that was enough. The next morning, I sat on my balcony with coffee and opened my laptop. The document was still there, the back row. I added a new paragraph. I thought I had to be the one who held it all together to belong. But maybe I was always meant to be the one who broke the cycle, who said the truth out loud, who showed up even when it hurt. Maybe that's what belonging really means. And then I kept writing. Not for them, not for Jason, not even for Mallory, but for me, for the girl who had sat in the back row, too afraid to make noise. For the woman who now understood she didn't need to be invited to take up space. She just had to choose it. I didn't expect the essay to go viral. I'd posted it quietly. An excerpt from the back row, just a few paragraphs, no big announcement, no names, just the story of a woman who showed up at a family wedding after being told not to come. I clicked publish on a whim, barely proofread it, and logged off for the rest of the day. By morning, my inbox had exploded. Hundreds of emails, DMs, comments, people tagging me, reposting, sharing pieces of my words with captions like "This is me," and I thought I was alone. One woman wrote, "My mother told me I was too dramatic to be loved. I've been trying to prove her wrong ever since. Thank you for reminding me that my truth still matters." Another, "I was the responsible one too, until they forgot to invite me to my father's memorial. I've never told anyone that before." I sat on the floor of my living room, reading message after message until I couldn't see through the tears. It wasn't just me. There were thousands of us. The daughters in the back row, the cousins who didn't get asked, the friends who always gave more than they got, until they vanished from the group chat and no one noticed. It was like my pain had built a bridge instead of a wall. And suddenly, I wasn't carrying it alone. That afternoon, Nora Hart called. Nora had been my high school English teacher, the kind of woman who never raised her voice, but could slice through your self-deceptions with one look. She wore cardigans in jewel tones, drank peppermint tea even in July, and once told me that truth was the most dangerous form of art, and the most necessary. "Delilah," she said, her voice warm and unhurried, "I just read your essay, and then I read it again, and then I sent it to every woman I know." I smiled, wiping at my face. "Thank you. That means everything." "I always knew you had a voice, but I didn't know how badly you needed to use it until now." I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. "I have an idea," she continued. "I want you to come speak at the college. Guest lecture, small group, mostly women, mostly students who think they're failing if they're not perfect. I think they need to hear this from someone who's lived it." My stomach turned. A month ago, I would have said no, politely, professionally. I'd have claimed scheduling conflicts or other obligations, or that I just wasn't ready. But I wasn't that version of me anymore. "I'll do it," I said. "Just don't make me wear heels." Nora laughed. "You've got a deal." Later that week, I met Mallory for coffee, not out of obligation, not to make nice or smooth things over for the sake of appearances, but because she'd asked and I'd said yes, and I didn't feel the need to punish her anymore. She arrived 10 minutes late, hair up, sunglasses on, still looking like she was running 3 different internal monologues at once. But she hugged me. First. Brief, awkward, but real. We sat near the window. I got my usual, black coffee, no sugar. She ordered something iced and green and elaborate. We didn't speak right away, but we didn't need to. Finally, she said, "I read it, the essay." I nodded. I figured. I knew it was me, even without names. "It wasn't just about you." "I know. That's what made it worse." I raised an eyebrow. "Worse?" She took a breath. Because it made me realize how many people I've done the same thing to, how many times I've chosen comfort over honesty, how often I've mistaken quiet for peace. I didn't reply. I just sipped my coffee. "I'm not going to ask you to take it down," she said. "It was true, it is true, and it's helping people." She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "But I wanted you to have this." I unfolded it. A letter, not typed, not emailed, handwritten, in her familiar, looping script. I read it slowly, then again. She wrote about how she'd envied me for years, not because of my success, but because of my composure, because I made adulthood look navigable. She wrote about how she'd felt like a fraud next to me, how she'd always expected me to break, and resented me for not doing it sooner. She ended it with, "I don't know how to love you the way you deserve yet, but I'm willing to learn, if you'll let me." I folded the letter and placed it gently back on the table. "Thank you," I said, "for trying." Mallory blinked. "Is that a yes?" "It's a maybe, but that's more than we've had in years." She smiled then, a real one. Not the curated grin she wore for brunch photos and engagement shoots, but something tired and open. "I'll take a maybe," she said. We parted outside the cafe. She hugged me again, this time longer. We didn't make promises, but we didn't pretend, and that felt like a kind of beginning. That night, I updated the document again. The back row. Only this time, I added a new section. Something I hadn't touched before. My childhood. The early signs of my perfectionism. The first time I stayed up all night organizing my bookshelf alphabetically, and the praise I got for being so mature. How it reinforced a lesson I hadn't realized I was learning. That love came more easily when I was useful. That neediness was a liability. I wrote about my mother, how she used to call me her little adult, how she leaned on me in ways a child should never be leaned on, how I never knew what it felt like to be babied, to be the one someone worried for, not about. It wasn't cruel. She wasn't cruel. But it made me into someone who could be left off a guest list without anyone expecting a fight. Someone who would accept exile with grace. Until she didn't. I ended the chapter with this. Maybe the real betrayal wasn't being uninvited. Maybe it was spending a lifetime making myself so easy to remove. And then I saved it. Not because it was perfect, but because it was finally mine. They called it a family meeting. Of course they did. Like we were voting on a new sofa or planning a carpool, not gathering to discuss the emotional debris left behind by a wedding, an essay, and 2 decades of avoidance. The invitation came from Dad, which made it feel obligatory instead of performative. He wasn't a talk-it-out kind of man. He was more of a grill meat, change the subject type. So when he texted, "Sunday, 5 p.m., my place, just us," I knew something real was about to happen. I almost said no. I drafted the message 3 times. "Can't make it. Maybe next week." Or, "Don't think I'm ready for this." But in the end, I just put my phone down and showed up. Because some wounds don't heal on their own, and some ghosts don't vanish until you name them. When I walked into the house, the table was already set. Not for dinner, there was no food, no place settings, just the good chairs pulled from the dining room, arranged in a circle in the living room like some kind of emotional battlefield. Dad sat in his recliner sipping water with a slice of lemon in it, his version of calming down. Morgan was perched on the armrest of the couch, arms crossed, but eyes open. Mallory was there too, in jeans and no makeup, hair pulled back like she hadn't been trying to prove anything for once. I stood in the doorway for a second longer than I needed to. Then Mallory said, "We weren't going to start without you." And something in me relaxed. I sat down. We didn't speak at first. It was the kind of silence only families can make, thick with history and unfinished arguments. Then Dad cleared his throat. "So, I think we owe each other some honesty." We all looked at him. This wasn't the role he normally played. "Delilah," he said, looking at me, "I think your piece, your writing, opened something for all of us, something that needed to be opened. And it hurt, but it also made me realize how much I haven't seen or said or asked." I didn't speak. I let him go on. "I leaned on you too much," he said. "After your mom left, I told myself you could handle it, that you were strong, but what I really meant was you didn't complain, and I'm sorry for that." He looked me in the eye when he said it, and I saw it. The regret, the shame, the love underneath all of it. "Thanks," I said quietly. "That means more than you know." Morgan chimed in next. "I want to apologize too, not for something specific, just for acting like your strength made you less deserving of care. I thought because you were always okay, I didn't have to check on you. But that's not fair." "It's okay," I said, and then corrected myself. "No, it wasn't okay, but I appreciate you saying that now." Then Mallory stood. Actually stood. She paced once in front of the fireplace, then stopped. "I want to talk about the letters," she said. I held my breath. I read them all. That night, I sat on the floor with a bottle of wine and devoured every word. And I hated you, not because of what you said, but because it was beautiful, honest, devastating. And I realized you'd felt all those things, and I never noticed, because I never asked. She turned to me. "I wasn't mad that you liked Jason. I was mad that you kept that part of you so hidden I didn't even know how much you were hurting." She paused. "I thought I was the wounded one, but you were bleeding the whole time, and I couldn't even see the cut." The room was dead silent. Even Dad looked shaken. I swallowed hard. "I didn't tell you because I thought being good meant being invisible, that if I ever spoke up, you'd all think I was selfish." "We thought you were selfish," Morgan admitted. "Sometimes. Too quiet. Too controlled. We didn't understand it was survival." "I didn't either," I said, "until recently." Mallory sat back down. "You didn't ruin my wedding. You saved it. If you hadn't come, I would have spent the whole day thinking I'd won some invisible battle. But I didn't win. I just lost you, and I don't want that." I looked at her, and for the first time, I believed her. Not because she said the right words, but because she said the hard ones. Dad leaned forward. "So where do we go from here?" No one answered right away, and I realized it was up to me. I could walk out. I could forgive them and move on, or I could invite them to do something different. "I think we start with this," I said, "with not pretending, with saying what we mean, even if it's messy, even if it's late." Morgan nodded. "I can do messy." Mallory gave a tiny smile. "I can try." Dad exhaled. "I'll put on some tea." We stayed like that for a while, quiet, but no longer distant. I felt something shift in my chest, something old and heavy finally dissolving. This wasn't a fix. It wasn't the end. But it was the beginning of a different kind of relationship, one I didn't have to earn by sacrificing parts of myself, one that had room for all of me. And as Dad poured the tea and Mallory passed out mugs and Morgan made some inappropriate joke that made us all laugh, I thought, this is what rebuilding looks like. Not sweeping gestures or tearful monologues, but showing up, again and again, even after everything, especially then. Chiedia Chat GPT. The next few weeks were quiet in a way I wasn't used to. Not silent, just steady. No late-night phone calls demanding I fix something, no frantic emails about family logistics, no emergency texts about forgotten birthdays or miscommunications or group photos needing last-minute retouching. It was as though we'd all silently agreed to stop pretending one person could hold up the sky for everyone else, and in that new stillness, something strange happened. I started missing them, not in the way I used to, where missing them meant craving their approval, their validation, their permission to be included. No, this was different. This was a kind of missing that didn't come from emptiness, but from wholeness, from realizing that connection doesn't have to cost you your boundaries, that love doesn't have to mean losing yourself. So I called Mallory, not to resolve anything, just to talk. She answered, breathless, mid-laugh. "Delilah, hang on. I just got a flower bomb in the kitchen." I heard Jason in the background shout, "It was a tactical error." A moment later, she returned. "Sorry, we're trying to bake something for our 1-month anniversary. Turns out neither of us can measure without arguing." I grinned. "Sounds about right." There was a pause. "How are you?" It was the first time in years she'd asked that without it being loaded, without needing the right answer. She just asked. "I'm good," I said, and meant it. "I've been writing." I saw the new piece, about the wedding dress. I winced. "Too much?" "No," she said. It was honest, made me cry a little. "Really?" "Yeah, I liked the part where you said the dress wasn't meant to be armor, that it's okay to wear something beautiful even if you're still healing underneath." I swallowed. That part scared me. "I think that's how you know it mattered." We talked for another 20 minutes, about nothing in particular. It felt easy, finally, like we'd both stopped needing to prove something. When we hung up, I felt a little lighter. Then Morgan called. "Emergency," she said. "I need your opinion on a sofa. I've narrowed it down to 2, but one makes me look like I'm trying to impress a therapist, and the other screams, 'Pinterest divorcee.'" I burst out laughing. "Is that a genre now?" "Apparently," she said. "Also, I miss you." "I miss you too. Do you want to come to the housewarming?" "Only if you let me sit on the wrong sofa." "Deal." She was quieter then. "I'm glad we had that meeting. It didn't solve everything, but I don't know. I feel like I can breathe around you now." "Same," I said. I think we were all holding our breath. The guest lecture at the college was 2 days later. I wore a simple black blouse, high-waisted jeans, and boots I'd nearly talked myself out of. I stood in front of 30 women in various states of exhaustion, skepticism, and guarded curiosity. Some looked like they hadn't eaten a real meal in days. Others were tapping pens anxiously, ready to take notes like it might save them. I cleared my throat. "My name is Delilah Hart," I said. And for a long time, I thought being reliable was the same thing as being worthy. One girl in the second row blinked fast as if already fighting tears. "I thought if I anticipated everyone's needs, stayed composed, kept my edges smooth, then I'd always be welcome. I didn't realize that people start to expect silence from the person who never makes noise." I told them about the wedding, not with names or gossip, but with truth. How I'd been uninvited, how I went anyway, and how I didn't go to confront anyone. I went to remember myself. "How many of you are the strong one in your family?" I asked. 27 hands went up. "How many of you have cried in private because you didn't feel allowed to fall apart in public?" All 30 hands, including mine. Afterwards, they lined up. One hugged me without asking. Another asked if she could send my essay to her mom. A third said, "This made me realize I don't want to be my sister's shadow anymore." I left with ink smudged on my palm and a heart fuller than I'd felt in years. When I got home, there was a card in my mailbox. No name, just my address in blocky print. Inside was a short note. I used to think the back row was safer, but now I see it was just farther from the people who needed me most. "Thank you for walking to the front." No signature, just that. And it was enough. That weekend we gathered again. This time, not for intervention or cleanup or whispered damage control, just for brunch. Mallory made quiche. Morgan brought mimosas. Dad burned the toast but insisted it added character. Jason talked about switching jobs. I told them about the lecture. We took a group photo and nobody asked to see it first to approve their angle. And when we sat down to eat, I didn't reach for my old roll. I didn't ask who needed what, or if everything was okay, or if I could do more. I just poured my coffee, said thank you, and joined the conversation already happening around me. I was there, not as the glue, not as the hero, just as me. That night, I posted one last entry on my blog. It wasn't long, just a few lines. It took being uninvited to finally understand what it meant to choose myself, not in defiance, but in peace. To everyone who's ever been quietly excluded for being too much, too intense, too together, this is for you. You don't have to shrink to be loved. You just have to stay. And at the bottom, have you ever been excluded by the people who were supposed to love you most? What did you do with that pain? Share your story in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe if this one made you feel seen. 6 months later, I woke up to a message request from someone I hadn't spoken to since college, Jess Rivera. We'd shared a dorm floor sophomore year, her door always open, always music playing, her life a rolling, glittery mess of scarves and politics and heartache. I'd admired her chaos the way someone might admire a thunderstorm, beautiful from a distance, dangerous up close. The message read, "Delilah, just read your blog. I think I still have one of your Post-it notes on my old mirror, the yellow one that said, 'You don't owe anyone your erasure.' It saved me back then. Thank you for writing. I'm so glad you never disappeared." I stared at that last line. I'm so glad you never disappeared, and felt it echo through my chest like a bell. Because there had been days, years even, when disappearing had felt easier. When being invisible was the only way to keep from disappointing people. When I thought love was something you earned through emotional acrobatics, through disappearing acts of selflessness no one ever saw but always expected. But I hadn't disappeared. I had chosen to stay. In my body, in my family, in my voice. And for the first time, I could feel what that choice was building. Not just a platform or a following or a list of likes, but a life with shape and color and volume, a life that felt like mine. The inbox was full again, not with corrections or demands or requests for unpaid labor, but with stories, real ones, from women and men and non-binary readers who all said some version of, "This happened to me too. I thought I was the only one. I thought something was wrong with me." The latest blog post, titled "Unlearning the Apology," had struck a nerve. I had written, "Sometimes being the strong one is just the polished version of being the forgotten one. And sometimes the only way back to your people is by letting them see you bleed." I closed my laptop. I didn't need to read another comment right now, because the story I was most interested in was happening offline. It was Sunday again. Brunch, as usual. But this time, it was at my place. I'd never hosted before. Not for family, not really. My apartment had always been too clean, too curated, too much of a showroom version of myself. But now the throw pillows were scattered, there were water rings on the coffee table, and the kitchen smelled like banana bread that may or may not be overbaked. Mallory brought flowers. Morgan brought a new boyfriend who was charming and a little too eager to be liked. Dad brought a six-pack and said, "Let's eat before someone talks about feelings." Jason didn't come. That was expected. We were friendly now, occasionally in touch, but there had never been a thing between us, only the haunting idea of a thing. And I was finally ready to let that go, because the love I'd been starving for wasn't romantic, it was recognition, and I'd finally given it to myself. Over quiche and coffee, Morgan told a story about falling off a swing in 3rd grade. Mallory rolled her eyes and corrected every detail. Dad laughed so hard he choked on a mimosa. I added nothing, just watched, absorbing the moment like sunlight through skin. And I realized they didn't need me to hold them together, they just needed me with them, present, honest, unburdened by the role of fixer. At one point, Mallory touched my arm and said, "Did you ever imagine we'd be like this again?" I thought about it. Not like this. Not this easy. "It's not perfect," she said. "I don't want perfect," I replied. I just want real. And this was. Real like laughter that doubled us over. Real like moments of awkward silence that didn't need to be filled. Real like being asked, "Are you okay?" And answering, "Not really," without apology. A few days later, I was on a podcast. The host, a 30-something named Keely, who wore neon glasses and asked the best kinds of questions, the ones that snuck under your ribs, leaned into her mic and said, "Delilah, you talk a lot about what it means to be the strong one. But what would you say to someone still stuck in that role?" I paused. I thought about the girl I'd been, at 10, at 16, at 27, all versions of myself who had thought value came from silence and service. I'd say, I answered carefully, "You're not a container. You're not here to hold everyone else. You're a person. And people, real people, get to need things, get to break down, get to ask for help." Keely nodded. "You ever go back to that moment? The wedding? The email?" "All the time," I admitted. Not out of pain, but because it was the rupture that let the truth out. And I needed that. I think we all did. She leaned forward again. "So what's next for you?" I smiled. "More mess," I said. "More honesty, hopefully more rest." She laughed. "That's a revolution in itself." And maybe it was. That night, as I brushed my teeth, I saw it. A post-it on my mirror. Not one I'd placed. Mallory had stuck it there at brunch when I wasn't looking. "You don't owe anyone your erasure." Same words I'd written years ago, thrown away, forgotten, now given back to me. I didn't cry. I smiled, because I hadn't disappeared. And maybe, just maybe, I'd never been invisible at all. Maybe I was just waiting for the moment I stopped hiding. In the weeks that followed, the back row became something more than a blog. It became a book proposal, a community, a quiet rebellion. People shared their stories, their scars, their ruptures. A woman in Berlin wrote about her sister's wedding. A man in New Zealand shared how he was written out of his father's will. A teenager in Kansas said, "Reading your words made me feel less fake." And through it all, I kept writing, not for closure, but for continuance, because this wasn't about being excluded anymore. It was about learning how to belong, to ourselves, to each other, to something honest. And as I clicked publish on the final chapter, I wrote, "You don't have to earn your place by erasing yourself. Sit in the front row, cry too loud, laugh too weird, be too much. You're already enough, always were." Then I closed the laptop, walked to the window, and stepped into my life, no longer the strong one, just the real one.